Look, we've got to start with Meghan Markle. She's made her long-awaited appearance on MasterChef.
Four semi-finalists walked into the MasterChef Australia kitchen believing the biggest moment of their season was finally here. Then Meghan Markle arrived, the cameras shifted, the royal music started, and suddenly the food competition became a Sussex television special. Nothing but drama and toxicity follows this woman everywhere, but even Meghan could not hold the spotlight for the full episode, because right in the middle of judging a contestant's deeply personal dish, the studio announced that a phone call had come through. The tasting stopped, the judges turned. Meghan smiled toward the side of the set, and Prince Harry appeared on FaceTime.
Surprise video call from her husband, Prince Harry. Have a look at this.
We've had a phone call to the studio.
Hi, my love.
No.
Hi. My husband's here.
This was supposed to be a cooking competition moment. Instead, it became something else entirely. Prince Harry's video call was presented as a surprise, a spontaneous little interruption, a sweet, unscripted cameo in the middle of Meghan Markle's guest appearance on MasterChef Australia. But come on. The timing was too perfect. The camera coverage was too clean. The reaction shots were too ready. And the whole thing was handled with such polished ease that even Australian morning television could not resist mocking how conveniently random it all looked. That is the heart of this story. Because the biggest moment of Meghan's appearance was not a dish. It was not a judging insight. It was not some brilliant culinary observation that left the contestants speechless. It was Harry. And that, more than anything else, exposed the problem. This appearance was clearly meant to strengthen Meghan's image as a serious lifestyle and food personality. It was supposed to say, here she is, confidently stepping into a major competition show, bringing elegance, warmth, taste, and authority. It was supposed to feel like a natural extension of the carefully built domestic brand she has been selling. Instead, the episode ended up proving something very different. It suggested that no matter how carefully the image is styled, no matter how soft the lighting, no matter how many words are used about meaning, love, heritage, and connection, the real commercial engine behind the spectacle is still royal association. Not the recipes, not the expertise, not the lifestyle philosophy, the royal connection. And the second Harry appeared on that screen, the entire illusion snapped into focus. Because suddenly the food did not matter nearly as much. The contestants did not matter nearly as much. The semi-final stakes did not matter nearly as much. What mattered was the Sussex brand, once again turning an ordinary television appearance into a stage-managed relationship moment. That is why this episode landed so awkwardly. That is why people kept talking about the call instead of the cooking. And that is why what should have been Meghan's showcase ended up becoming a reminder of the one thing she still cannot outrun. Let's start at the beginning. The episode introduced Meghan with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for someone with unquestioned authority in the field. The judges did not simply say a special guest was arriving. They built her entrance like the arrival of a global icon, a humanitarian, a woman known around the world, someone whose presence alone was supposed to electrify the kitchen. The contestants looked stunned. The doors opened. Meghan walked in. And the room responded exactly as the production hoped it would. Everything about the presentation was designed to make the audience feel that this was not just a guest spot, this was an event. And then came the first contradiction. One judge asked whether they should call her Duchess. Meghan immediately answered with the kind of line that was clearly meant to sound casual and relatable. Call me Meghan. Simple, warm, down to earth. It was a good television answer. It said, no distance, no fuss, no ceremony, just Meghan, just a relaxed California woman who loves food, family, fresh produce, and connection. But the problem is that the episode itself did not follow that logic for even a few more seconds. Because the entire challenge was then framed around the very title she had just seemed eager to soften. The contestants were not simply cooking for Meghan, they were asked to make a dish fit for a duchess. So which version were viewers supposed to believe? Was this the ordinary, approachable Meghan who wanted none of the formal trappings? Or was this the royal figure whose title gave the entire segment its glamour, status, and reason for existing? The answer was obvious: the show wanted both. It wanted the warmth of just Meghan and the prestige of the Duchess. It wanted the intimacy of a lifestyle host and the aura of monarchy. It wanted her to feel ordinary and elevated at the same time. And that double image is exactly where the discomfort begins. Because if you truly want to step away from ceremony, you do not build a competition challenge around aristocratic fantasy. You do not market the guest as both modest and majestic in the same breath. You do not downplay the title verbally while monetizing it structurally. That is not simplicity. That is branding. And throughout the episode, that branding never stopped. Meghan leaned into the language that has now become central to her public reinvention. Food as love language, cooking as connection, meals as memory, seasonal produce, fresh ingredients, family traditions, emotional meaning, nourishment as care. On paper, that all sounds lovely. In a lifestyle series, it makes sense. In a cookbook introduction, it works. In a soft focus home entertaining segment, it fits perfectly. But this was not that. This was a competitive semi-final. Contestants were fighting for immunity and momentum at a crucial stage of the show. They needed sharp direction, real feedback, useful observations, and evidence that the guest in front of them was contributing something more than mood. What they mostly got were beautifully packaged sentiments. Cook from the heart. Tell a story. Make it meaningful. Have fun. Find connection. Again, none of those lines are offensive. In fact, they are pleasant. But pleasant is not the same thing as insightful. And when people are standing under pressure, trying to balance flavor, texture, timing, technique, and presentation, inspirational phrasing can start to sound suspiciously like a substitute for expertise. That was another major weakness of the episode. The show kept positioning Meghan as a source of culinary wisdom, but the substance often felt broad rather than specific. The regular judges still seemed to be doing the serious technical work. They were the ones bringing the actual competition logic. Meghan, by contrast, often felt more like the face of the moment than the authority behind it. And that distinction matters. Because the entire premise depends on viewers believing she belongs there for more than symbolism. If the guest is presented as the emotional center of the challenge but not the clearest source of culinary judgment, then the whole exercise starts looking less like competition television and more like image curation. Even the staging reinforced that impression. At one point, Meghan personally moved from station to station to tell each contestant that 30 minutes remained. Think about that for a moment. In most competition shows, a single announcement to the room would be enough. Efficient, practical, done. Here, the same message was delivered one person at a time, creating multiple mini interactions, multiple grateful responses, multiple opportunities for the camera to follow her through the kitchen. Was that useful? Barely. Was it televisual? Absolutely. And that is the recurring pattern throughout the episode, moments that function less as judging and more as choreography. The ingredient table told a similar story. Meghan introduced seasonal produce, lemons, honey, macadamias, Brussels sprouts, and other items that supported the image the episode wanted to project. Fresh, tasteful, wholesome, elegant, domestic. Then came the kind of detail these productions love. A little household anecdote, a small personal note, one of those carefully placed glimpses into real life that feels engineered to spread in promo clips. Not because it is informative, but because it is brand compatible. And viewers noticed. Long before the full episode had settled into public memory, people were already picking apart those promo moments. The edible flowers, the polished smiles, the repeated emotional language, the curated domestic details. To supporters, it was harmless. To critics, it looked performative. But whichever side you fall on, the reaction exposed something important. Audiences have become highly sensitive to packaging. They know when they're being asked not just to watch a guest, but to admire one. That is where the pre-show controversy also becomes relevant. There had been reports before broadcast that Meghan's team had objected to language around royalty in promotional framing. Her side later pushed back on suggestions of major conflict and said she had a wonderful time with the judges and contestants. The final episode certainly did not show open hostility. Everyone smiled, everyone praised her, everyone appeared warm and gracious. And that, oddly enough, made the earlier dispute feel even stranger. Because the show itself was absolutely drenched in royal framing, it could build a challenge around a duchess. It could introduce her with ceremonial fanfare. It could turn the entire atmosphere into a polite celebration of status. Yet somehow, according to those reports, one playful word elsewhere was allegedly a problem. Maybe some of those claims were exaggerated. Maybe the off-camera dynamics were overblown. That is possible. But what the final cut undeniably showed was a tightly managed presentation in which every rough edge had been smoothed away. If anything awkward happened, viewers were not invited to see it. And maybe that is precisely why the final result still produced backlash. Not because it revealed a scandal. Not because it showed open conflict. But because it felt overmanaged. Too polished. Too eager. Too careful in what it wanted the audience to conclude. And then came the moment that blew the whole thing open. The tasting should have been where the contestants reclaimed the episode. The cooking was done. The clock had stopped. The plates were ready. Now the focus should have shifted fully to flavor, execution, risk, and the personal stories the contestants had been encouraged to bring into their food. One contestant, Aaron, had built his dish around memories of his grandmother. It was exactly the kind of emotional connection Meghan had said she valued. This should have been the point where the show rewarded the contestants' narrative and craftsmanship. Instead, the phone rang. A production voice announced a call to the studio. Meghan turned, greeted Harry affectionately, and the entire room pivoted. Judges, contestants, cameras, energy, all of it moved instantly away from the food and onto the call. That is the moment this stopped being a cooking segment and became something much closer to a PR tableau. Because let's be honest, even if the call really was unexpected, the way it was presented made it look anything but accidental. The production had the framing, the audio was clean, the reactions were caught, the interruption was absorbed seamlessly. Harry asked if he was interrupting something, which ironically only highlighted the absurdity of the situation. Yes, he was. They were in the middle of judging a semi-final dish. If it was private, it could have waited. If it was urgent, it would not have become a light on-air exchange. If it was spontaneous, it was astonishingly convenient television. Can anyone outside production prove exactly how it happened? No. But viewers do not need proof to notice presentation, and the presentation told its own story. Even mainstream Australian television reacted with sarcasm, not some fringe commentator, not some deeply invested royal critic digging through gossip. Mainstream presenters looking at the footage and openly joking about what an incredible coincidence it was that the cameras happened to be there for that perfectly timed little moment. That matters. Because once ordinary television coverage starts treating your surprise as suspiciously neat, the issue is no longer internet conspiracy. The issue is that the staging has become too obvious. And the consequences inside the episode were immediate. The contestants' dishes waited while the call continued. The emotional center of Aaron's tasting moment vanished into the background. Harry became the headline before the show had even finished making its point. The judges called him charming, the room laughed, the tone shifted, and just like that, the semi-final was no longer about what the contestants had created. It was about the Sussex marriage. That is devastating if the goal was to establish Meghan as a standalone food and lifestyle authority. Because in the single most discussed moment of her big television appearance, she was not elevated by her own presence. She was overshadowed by her husband's cameo. Again, this is the trap that keeps reappearing around her public image. She wants to be seen as an independent media figure, entrepreneur, and lifestyle personality. But the biggest surge of attention still arrives the moment royal proximity enters the frame. The title opens the door. Harry often becomes the headline. And when that happens, the audience is reminded, consciously or not, of the hierarchy beneath the branding. That does not mean Meghan lacks screen presence. It does not mean the contestants were lying when they said she was kind. And it does not mean the experience in the room was necessarily unpleasant. In fact, that part deserves fairness. Contestants who were actually there spoke positively about her. They said she was warm, calming, genuine, interested in their food, and confident on camera. One said she spoke intelligently about the dishes. Those comments matter more than faceless online speculation, and they should not be dismissed just because they complicate a harsher narrative. But positive personal impressions do not erase questionable production choices. Both things can be true. She may have treated people well, and the show may still have overpromoted her. She may have been gracious in person, and the final edit may still have turned the competition into a showcase built around admiration. That is the deeper problem here. The issue is not that Meghan smiled too much. The issue is not that she was supportive. The issue is not even that she brought a celebrity aura into the room. The issue is that the episode demanded reverence while struggling to justify it on culinary terms. Viewers were asked to accept her as a major food figure in a setting where technical authority still appeared to rest mostly with others. They were asked to buy the intimacy of Call Me Meghan, while the structure kept monetizing the mystique of the Duchess. They were asked to focus on personal storytelling while the most important personal story in the room was interrupted for a Sussex marriage moment. That is why the whole thing felt self-defeating. And there was another subtle tension running underneath it all, the instability of the backstory itself. On this appearance, Meghan emphasized California freshness, meaningful produce, family influence, and food as emotional inheritance. In other contexts, she has also spoken about a more ordinary, convenience-heavy upbringing and learning over time. Now, to be clear, those details do not have to contradict each other. A person can grow up with both home cooking and fast food, memory is layered, identity is messy, real lives contain more than one truth. But the reason viewers react skeptically is because the version selected often seems to align very neatly with the brand being sold in that moment. When the project is domestic elegance, the language becomes farm-to-table. When the project is relatability, the tone becomes self-taught and ordinary. When the project is aspiration, the imagery becomes refined and elevated. Again, that is not unique to Meghan. Many celebrities do this. Public personas are built through selective emphasis, but in her case, the editing can feel so intentional that people stop hearing authenticity and start hearing strategy. In MasterChef Australia magnified that problem rather than solving it. Because once viewers began to sense that the performance was too polished, every detail became open to reinterpretation. The sweetness looked practiced, the modesty looked branded, the emotional language looked rehearsed, and the Harry call looked less like a surprise than the inevitable climax of a heavily managed appearance. That is the irony here. The production tried so hard to protect the image that it ended up exposing the mechanism. If the episode had allowed more roughness, more unpredictability, more genuine challenge, it might actually have played better. A little awkwardness can humanize a person. A moment of real tension can make someone look more authentic, not less. But this episode seemed terrified of letting anything unscripted disturb the glow. So instead, the glow became the story. And because the glow was so relentless, it started to look artificial. That is why the backlash did not require some major scandal. The episode did not implode. No one shouted. No one walked off. No contestant openly rejected her input. Nothing explosive happened. And yet the criticism flourished anyway. Because what viewers saw was enough. They saw the contradiction between humility and title. They saw the gap between lifestyle language and competition expertise. They saw the emotional brief given to contestants interrupted by a royal family cameo. They saw Meghan presented as the star, only for Harry to become the most memorable part of the segment. And that last point is the most brutal of all. This was supposed to be a major solo television appearance. A moment that strengthened Meghan's independent food and lifestyle image beyond carefully controlled home entertaining content. A moment that said she could step into another established format and carry it on her own terms. But after all that build-up, what did people remember? Not the winning dish. Not the finest technique. Not the cleverest culinary note. Not the strongest judging contribution. They remembered the title. They remembered the praise. They remembered the call. They remembered Harry. And once that becomes the takeaway, the whole strategy collapses into its own contradiction. Because the appearance was meant to show that Meghan belongs at the center of this kind of cultural space through her own brand authority. Instead, it reminded everyone that the greatest burst of fascination still comes from royal access. That is not necessarily fair. But it is clearly true in terms of attention. The moment Harry's face appeared, the energy changed, the room leaned in, the media clipped it, social media seized it. The entire scene was instantly more marketable than anything about the food itself. And if that is what happens during your big food world crossover moment, then the uncomfortable question becomes impossible to avoid. Did this appearance actually convince anyone that Meghan belongs at the center of a serious cooking competition? Maybe some viewers were charmed. Maybe some thought she was warm and elegant. Maybe some enjoyed the fantasy of it all. But if the goal was to establish culinary credibility, then the episode did not land with the force it needed. It felt more like a glossy character presentation than a compelling demonstration of food authority. And that is why the criticism stuck. Because the problem was never simply that Meghan was there. The problem was what the production wanted her presence to mean. It wanted viewers to see a natural food personality, an effortless cultural figure, a woman equally at home with contestants, cameras, and culinary stakes. What many viewers saw instead was something much more calculated. A carefully protected image wrapped in celebrity ceremony, interrupted by the exact royal connection it was supposedly trying not to rely on. That is the final contradiction. The episode tried to make Meghan look relatable, but treated her like royalty. It tried to make her look authoritative, but leaned on mood more than expertise. It tried to center contestants' personal stories, then paused one of those stories for a husband cameo. It tried to prove she could hold the spotlight alone, then let Harry walk away with the strongest headline. And once you see all of that together, the episode stops looking like a triumphant crossover and starts looking like a misfire. Not a disaster. Not a scandal. But a revealing misfire. Because sometimes failure does not come in the form of chaos. Sometimes it comes in the form of polish so excessive that the seams begin to show. Sometimes the most damaging thing is not an ugly moment, but a beautiful one that feels just a little too convenient. That is what happened here. The producers gave Meghan the softest possible runway. The judges were gracious. The contestants were respectful. The edit was protective. The atmosphere was glowing. And still, the part people could not stop talking about was the interruption. That says everything. In the end, this MasterChef appearance did not really answer the question of whether Meghan can build a convincing food empire beyond carefully controlled lifestyle content. If anything, it sharpened the doubts. Because when the kitchen was built around her, when the contestants were told to cook to her brief, when the cameras handed her a premium showcase, the scene that dominated public memory was not about food at all. It was about access. It was about image. It was about the prince on the phone. And that may be the most telling verdict of all. For all the talk of meaning, connection, nourishment, and story, the audience did not leave remembering culinary authority. They left remembering monarchy repackaged as lifestyle television. That was supposed to be Meghan's victory lap. Instead, it became a reminder of the one truth her brand still cannot escape. When everything else is stripped away, the most powerful ingredient in the Sussex formula is not taste. It is proximity to the crown.